I think we're live. Alrighty, everybody. Hi, it's Maggibot, and we are doing our Sunday morning hangout. Today I am joined by the fabulous Nicholas. Hi, Nicholas.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Yourself?
I'm doing okay. Gotta turn my volume off on my other monitor there, and we're good. I thought we'd take the day today to talk about Kickstarter and kind of its greater consequences in gaming and what it might be doing for us or against us. I have heard, I listened to a podcast last week, which was really exciting because I don't usually get time to. And they were talking about how Kickstarter has just affected them and their buying habits. And I thought that was interesting.
Hmm.
So just for background, how often do you back things on Kickstarter?
Uh, it varies a bunch. Like right now is really hopping Kickstarter season as publishers try to aim for like this is about the last opportunity to have some hope of hitting Christmas, I think, for releases.
Yeah.
Um, so it's been really busy on Kickstarter for the past 6 weeks or something. And then there's usually like periods where I just don't back anything. But lately I've been backing like tons of stuff. It feels like.
Well, it feels like it does go in these waves where you get a very early year campaign, a July campaign, and then you get these horrible ones for you and I in like November. There's another boom.
Yeah.
And those are the most frustrating for me because it's the height of Essen season and I really don't want to spend money on games that are, in the next year. I would much rather spend my money on the games out of Germany.
Yep. Yeah. I don't really understand those. They seem like they're a bad time for everyone's budgets because of Christmas shopping around the corner, basically, if nothing else.
But I don't really have any like data on that as well because I've not seen any season that will kill projects that you think are going to fund. Like everything seems to fund pretty much the way you think it will. But just these like in our world, we don't get the like huge cool mini type $1 million projects or anything, but you definitely have seen some overfunding all year this year at least.
Yep.
It seems like it's becoming more prominent. So just recently, there has been a pretty good number of projects and a lot of people talking about launching in July as well. So I'm a little scared for that. But all of them that say that they're going to get their games out by us, and I have trouble believing that all of them will get to market that quickly.
Yeah. It like at this stage, it feels like an aggressive deadline for sure.
So what are the first things that you look for when you're like looking at a Kickstarter, whether or not to back it?
So the things I'm usually looking for are some description of like why, like what mechanisms are interesting to me. Um, and then I usually go hunting for a rulebook immediately. Like if you don't have a rulebook link that I can find, then I'm probably just going to skip it. Um, or at least like a how to play video, although I don't like those as much usually. I just usually I can skim a rule book a lot faster and get an idea of whether or not I'm interested in a game much more quickly.
And maybe even better information from a rulebook than from someone trying to teach it online, because I think a lot of the times that's even the game maker, and they're not so great at teaching their own games.
Yeah, yeah. Teaching your game, I think, is always challenging because like you have the rules so firmly in your head, and yeah, and you've been through so many iterations of them. Like lately, I've been playtesting Lisboa. I've played 5 different versions of that game, and I think I could explain some version of Lisboa, but probably not the latest one, especially since Vital has, I know that he's changed it around a little bit since my last playtest.
So Eric in the chat says he looks at the price and the art. Does that matter to you for a Kickstarter, the price itself?
Like I generally don't worry too much about pricing. Like, fortunately, I'm in a pretty financially comfortable place right now. So if it's something that interests me, I don't have to worry too much about it.
Well,
There are definitely
I'm
like really expensive ones, that I'm going to
For me,
skip.
it's less like, can you afford it? But is it more like, does that game seem valuable for $60? Or do you ever like take that into
It's
account?
something. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't weigh against the price per se as much as like, is it interesting enough for me to bother with? Um,
To bother with.
like, there's just so many games, and so many of them are just not relevant to my interest, and that's fine. And like, I do sometimes think about like, this is a game that I would prefer to pay only $30 for, like if it's a smaller game, or maybe it's like just a card game. I'm like, why is this $30 when it should be like 15 or 20? Because it's just a quick little card game, and I'll enjoy it, but not that much. So yes, I guess it is a factor.
Well, and I
Uh,
think that improperly priced pieces can be one of the biggest indicators of a not experienced campaign. Whenever you see campaigns that are just completely outside their depth, you definitely see them pricing either really, really low or really, really high.
right.
The low ones are the ones that scare me the most.
Yes, the little ones are always terrifying. Like I definitely look more like, there's definitely a price point where I'm like, given the stuff that you've listed and the stuff that's supposed to be in the box, I don't know how this is going to work, and it seems likely that you're going to shoot yourself in the foot.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Like you hit any stretch goals and you're starting to lose money on the thing or whatever.
Right. You're like paying $5 for every backer. Um, yeah, which is really, really easy to do. Because you just like stuff more stuff in the box, and you're like, oops, I need a bigger box, and oops, I need to pay more for shipping. Like, I crossed the shipping threshold, and things go bad really fast.
So I definitely get this question a lot. How do you think Kickstarter has affected retailers?
I don't deal much with retailers, so I don't really know. I am generally concerned that Kickstarters are not like, they tend to be very unfriendly for retailers, in the sense that like, a lot of them don't even offer a retailer level with like a discount, at like a price that makes sense. And even if they do, like, that means that the retailer is putting down money many months in advance, which is, as I understand it, usually tricky.
So that's the biggest part for my opinion of why retailers probably don't need to or want to kickstart things. When you pay money for the goods that go to the store, like if I pay for Settlers of Catan, there's a certain amount of days that you have to sell it to hopefully try and pay for it. And Kickstarter, you're literally paying out and then holding that money off for months. So it doesn't
Right.
really work with a retail like business plan.
No. Yeah. But beyond that, like, I just don't deal with retail much at all. So I don't see like a lot of what happens in the stores. I do see like a good number. Like, I see more games. Like, I guess earlier I felt there were more games that went on to Kickstarter, and then if you didn't get the Kickstarter, then like, it just didn't make it to retail, and that was a bit different. I'm seeing more games, sort of show up in shops now, which is great, I think.
Well, I think there's a lot more resources online about how to get through the supply chain, because the supply chain for retail, like 3 years ago, for most Kickstarter folks, was this giant mystery. And like as soon as they had their finished product in hand, they would be like then reaching out to retailers saying, "How do I get this on your shelf?"
Right.
Which is not ideal for the retailer or them, really. I do feel like there's an element. I like retailer levels a lot, just to build community. Like if there's a $1 retailer level that just like clues that publisher into emailing you later to get the games, that's always really wonderful. But it's hard with Kickstarter exclusives, because I've yet to see a retail level that allows future purchases of Kickstarter exclusives. So
Right.
I think that would be like a big game changer for us.
Yeah, I remember someone was trying something that sounded vaguely interesting, where they're like, there's is like a $1 level, but you like you paid $1 to Kickstarter, but you were agreeing to pay for like 5 copies of the game later, which sounded more sane.
There were 2 campaigns recently that did something similar to that, where like your store still got like the $1 level, so you get it through your social media and all that stuff, but then we're not paying for those games until they're ready to ship. They're just going to send us an invoice at that time. And I thought that was like really killer. I don't think that every company is that organized to do that, but it was the best of both worlds. Excellent,
Right.
excellent idea. At least for me. But we do get a fair amount of people that so we as a store have backed maybe like 20 campaigns, 30 campaigns, nothing crazy because we don't really spend our money that way usually. But it's really excellent sometimes when you get that, like I've got Vino's Kickstarter edition coming in, and we'll get like 1 or 2 people during the holiday going, oh, what, you have this? Oh gosh. And then they'll like, that'll be like the perfect gift for someone. I really love that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Having those big fancy things.
Yeah. There's some discussion about like looking at for Kickstarters whether you like the publisher. There are publishers that I know are like have done stuff before, and so I believe that they're more likely to actually get me a game. Beyond that, there's very few publishers who I actually trust. It's not so much like quality of the game as much as like there are very few publishers who consistently make games that are interesting to me, which is a different thing, right?
Right, and I think a lot of the big Euro game companies are not yet on Kickstarter. They do have, I can't remember the name of the website, the German one, but they have their own version of crowdfunding. But
Yeah.
none of the big publishers that I love in Germany are using it. So
No.
I think there's a couple of publishers that, like something like Tasty Minstrel, as Nutter said in the chat, like that company would definitely at least warrant a lot of research, like if they put out a game.
Right.
But I'm not going to like every game by any publisher ever.
It'd be amazing. But
I mean, I invite any publisher to try. What's Your Game is pretty darn close. They at least always have something interesting.
Yeah, I'm generally happy to like give What's Your Game titles a couple of plays, and Spotter isn't doing Kickstarter, but if they did, I'd be all over that.
I just like their pre-order system. Spotter has like pretty good deals in pre-order, and it goes directly to them, which I like. So if I can't purchase stuff in my store, then I like to try and purchase as directly as I can, fewer fees and everything else. Spotter for Indonesia, I think the price was like, it was really good. It was like 80 or something.
Yeah, I thought the price was pretty reasonable, and then I learned that they're replacing all the cardboard chits with wooden bits. And I was like, ooh, I feel much better about this all of a sudden.
Well, the number of copies of Indonesia that I've seen for sale in the last like 3 months, it's been like 20 copies in the local market because everyone's ready for the new edition.
Yep.
I'm really glad though, because they're putting some of those games into retail now because of Passport Game Studios. So they're trying to sign more, and I know Alban Viard's games are getting signed into more distributors soon, and like it's an interesting time for these types of funkier games that shouldn't sell but do.
Well, like I think, I'm just really happy to see games find their audience wherever that is. I'm happy to see them more widely available so more people can try them out, because it's always frustrating when you like learn about, like you missed a Kickstarter and then you find out 6 months later that's relevant to your interests, and you're like, oh,
Euro Crisis.
Yes, yeah. Well, like Euro Crisis was something that like it was one of those games I was sort of on the edge about. Like it wasn't clear to me whether it was going to be like sort of two-party-ish, I guess, in some sense. Or
Well,
I don't
and
know.
for me, the art looked pretty amateurish, and I wasn't like, it looked like a stereotypical Kickstarter game, like Kickstarter art. I don't know how to quantify that, but it, to me, I couldn't tell whether or not it was going to be a good game or whether it was thought out properly or anything like from their campaign.
It's like I don't know these people. I skimmed the rule book and it sounded like it could work, but maybe not. Like well, I don't know. Like, I think I generally have a pretty good idea of what works from Roblox, like 80% of the time or so. But that was one of the ones I was a little bit more on the edge.
Well, I didn't need to bring up Euro Crisis again. Someday Game Surplus will have some more copies, and I will have one.
We can hope and dream and order.
Yes.
Yeah, there's some discussion of Splotter and like sizing their print runs, and Splotter's interesting. Well, so like Splotter is a couple of guys who just want to put out games that they make and that they love, and they don't really care about being like a quote successful publisher unquote. So like Kickstarter just isn't interesting to them because they'd rather work on the game as late as they can, and they have a deal, I think, where they can send the rule book to the printer shortly before Essen and have it done.
Yeah.
Which is always really sweet, and wouldn't like they just, it's one of these things that they could do Kickstarter if they want to delay releasing their game by like 9 months or a year, but there's
at this point they've got they don't need to do any of that, and I
as
think
far as they're concerned, they're living the dream.
I think that they're pretty happy with how things are going for them, especially with all these reprints. That really says something about like they realize that there are more people out there discovering their games after the fact and years after the fact and wanting to get into them, but it's like obscenely expensive. Some of those games, like a copy of Bus right now, is stupid expensive.
I was so amazed to find a copy just lying around my office, but my office is really weird.
Just so Patrick is in the chat right now talking about Food Chain Magnet as their first Splotter. I would highly recommend Roads and Boats instead of Food Chain. You'll get a better introduction.
I even find like I definitely prefer teaching like Great Zimbabwe, because at least if someone's winning in Great Zimbabwe really hard, it makes the game end faster rather than slower. Which is
in
the
Food
problem.
Chain, that's just not the case.
Yeah, Food Chain definitely has a learning issue where it's like if you're learning from someone, or just someone happens to like get the hang of the thing before you, then you just sort of sit there for a few hours while they rake in cash.
Well, and literally, like you run out of usable actions
right.
in Food Chain. It is a good, well-made game, but it's certainly not a great first introduction to Splotter, I don't think.
Yeah. Whereas in the Great Zimbabwe, you're like, oh, oops, they won, and then the game's over, and you're done, and you can try again, or you can put it away and try something else.
And I think that one's coming back out with Indonesia this year. So
yes, that's correct. I don't think they're doing any component changes for the Great Zimbabwe, but I don't think there were any issues with the Great Zimbabwe's components.
No, I mean, it's one of the better of all the Splotter games for components.
Yeah, like Indonesia, I also know that they're fixing up the map, which is good. I've been debating, well, mostly just laziness around printing out some of the alternative maps and some concerns about correctness.
I have not even considered printing those out. No, I'm waiting till the new copies are out.
Yep. Well, that was basically, I was like, because I didn't get my copy until fairly recently. So I was like, maybe I should print them. And they were like, reprint. I was like, oh, okay, I've lost all motivation all of a sudden.
So Netters brings up in the chat, she was talking about party games and how many of those that are really needed, because they do seem to pop up a lot on Kickstarter, more than any other group. I think you get the either the like Cards Against Humanity clones, or you just get straight up goofy party games and that kind of thing. But what they always seem to do well, like even unknown, unheard of people like still funding their games. I don't quite get it.
I don't understand, but on the other hand, a lot of these games are just basically a deck of cards.
Right. So their funding goals are like $2,500 instead of $30,000 to do a full game.
They can just print them wherever, pretty much. Getting cards printed is easy and cheap, and I imagine some of them manage to screw up, but it's kind of hard to go wrong with a deck of cards.
Although that is another way to tell if a company is very new, if their decks of cards don't equal like 54 cards or 98 cards.
Yeah, if they're like, this game consists of 65 cards, and you're like, what's going on?
Then you just know that they're just not smart people. They
They're
don't.
just wasting sheets of paper at that point. Yeah.
I was reading what I was saying. I bought a fake. I'm not sure what game she's talking about, but I did back one party game on Kickstarter once. I backed a set type game. It was like Block Party.
Oh,
I quite liked it, but
that sounds neat. I've never heard of this thing, but
it was giant wooden blocks and like kind of set rules. Once the blocks fell, you had to try and find sets and like put them together. It was just silly and fun. But I more than anything, like the people that email into work asking the store to carry something, or even emailing personally just to see how to get into stores and stuff. It's always party games. It's always, we're like Cards Against Humanity, but, and then they fill that in, whatever it is.
Cards Against Humanity, but with cute animals. I wish. Pick the baby animal to go with this adjective.
I would play that game. I would probably play that game. I think that trope, like, you'd think that people are getting sick of it, but I think it hits more non-hobby gamers than not, and that's how they get into gaming. So I think they're still just selling incredible amounts of these crazy party card games, anything that sounds rude or weird or whatever. You always think those sales are going to slow down, but no. Every year we sell, Settlers of Catan on Cards Against Humanity like it's going out of style.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I think part of it is that they're games that you play through the cards and you see all the words a few times and you're sort of done with it and you need a new pack of words to play with or something. I don't really understand. So that's okay. But I also don't really understand Munchkin either, so what do I know?
And people really seem to like it, and it defines their gaming-dom. I think people like Flux too, and that one for me, it's so long. It's so long with so little going on.
It's like 5 minutes or 3 hours, who knows?
And there's no escape button or anything. There's no like, I would not like to play this anymore. Like, put up your hand. Someday, maybe they'll print that card.
Yeah, I hope. I'm especially buying games for the art, and I just don't care about art that much. I mean, like, if a game has nice art, then that's wonderful. But it's rare that I'm like, "Ooh, I want that game for the art." Sometimes I'm like, I wish that art was like, I could just buy a pack of wallpapers or something and I'd be very happy.
Well, these days, I don't trust good art. As soon as a game doesn't, it has really nice, beautifully done art, I get worried that they didn't work on the game enough.
Yeah.
And I think I'm not into the French style of games either, which is like, those are really beautiful games, but they usually have a lot of randomness in them.
Mm-hmm.
I did buy, did you ever play Omen Reign of War?
No, I didn't.
I bought that one for the art. It was an okay game, but the art was really beautiful. I wouldn't play Cards for Humanity either. I don't like humans, nutters.
I'm just here for the puppies.
I think my favorite party game I've ever seen on Kickstarter was the I can't remember its name, but it was basically charades but with taxidermy, and I bought it for my sister. It was probably the funniest thing I've ever seen. Someone asks what's the difference between German and French style games. The French style is more of aesthetically pleasing games. They focus on art and theme and world building. German style games typically are very low in randomness of some sort. They can have theme or beautiful art, but they don't traditionally worry about it too much.
Right. The Germans are happy with some cubes and wooden sticks.
Just tiny cubes and little wooden sticks and putting them on the board. That's why when you say Euro games to someone who's been in the hobby too long, there's definitely more divides after that. Like that's only Ameritrash versus Euro, and then inside Euro there's lots of different types. The French style and the German style are very different things.
Yeah, I feel like there's been interesting like mixes of things lately.
I think everyone got wise to the fact that, German style mechanisms could go into games with really nice art, and that would be a good thing. So you find a lot more hybrids, and you find Ameritrash Euro hybrids and all that. And it's hard because a lot of like Euros were designed and developed in the United States, so you call them Euros. Or like I always thought that was kind of a funny one because it was a location-based thing, and if you were designing out of Sheboygan, it's not European. But they're still called that.
Yeah, this is a lot of why I avoid a lot of jargon is simply because I don't like it.
Oh, sure, yeah. It's somewhat helpful sometimes when you're speaking with other people with lots of gaming experience, and you kind of want to help delineate what you like and what you don't. Those types of jargony things can help you narrow that down.
Yeah, I usually I've gotten in the habit lately of asking people who I don't know anything about. I'm trying to like pick a game to play. I'm like, what are some games that you enjoyed recently? Because that usually gives me something to work with, something that might be in their neighborhood.
Right, and it's much easier to select games for people once you know games they already enjoy. It's so much easier to kind of recognize what about a game, like what can you pull out of that game and then relate to something else. And so well, I know that Euro is short for European style game, but it's just awkward when people are not European when they design them. They're talking about Soulfall. I don't know anything about Soulfall. I'm sorry.
Sounds like a thing.
Oh, maybe it's something he's working on. So in Kickstarter as well, the one thing that I have had some trouble with, you hear about games that are getting kickstarted that are already out in other countries. That one's been kind of a recent thing. Yokohama is a really good example of a game that I could go purchase, or I could wait for the Tasty Minstrel version to come out, and it's kind of like the deluxe thing. I have a really hard time not just buying the first version. Do you ever have trouble with that?
Yes, like all the time. Like doubly so since I've gone to Spiel for the last couple of years. So I usually just I actually already have the game that's now on Kickstarter, and that's always awkward. At least at that point, it's not like a decision for me. It's just like, oh, I already have this, so I guess not for me. But I can say nice things about it if I liked it, or whatever.
Have you ever purchased the deluxe or the Kickstarted version and then sold off the original?
I don't think so, but that's largely because I don't like deluxe versions. Deluxe versions in my mind tend to be heavier, bigger, more difficult for me to take places. And since I don't care that much about components in the first place, as long as the base game, the original version's components were actually usable to play the game, yeah.
I could see that. I will say I liked the deluxe version of Orleans. That was the only deluxe game I can think of that I really enjoyed. And I guess Martin Wallace. I like all his deluxe versions because they're not generally that much heavier. It's just usually wooden bits rather than cardboard.
Right, and it's like a moderate number of wooden bits instead of cardboard bits. But yeah, in general, I'm supportive of them for people who like such things, and I know that there's a lot of people who are just like shiny metal coins or custom meeples instead of cubes, and yeah.
I always wish there was a cube option. Whenever they introduce custom meeples to something, I'm just like, where can I just go back to the cubes now?
Can I just get some
But
discs and cubes and
it would be much easier, yeah.
octagons? Everything will be happy.
Nutters asks about publishers for different countries, like different shipping costs. I'm guessing is the big thing with different countries. She asks about Grail games, which is great for Australians, and then how Latin America and Africa at this point are kind of left out in most of the shipping deals for Kickstarter. I did think that Tasty Minstrel recently came up with something pretty smart. They got some partners out in China, and they basically have them shrink wrapping the Chinese language rules to the back of the retail version and shipping straight from China, and like selling those as a separate pledge level. I thought that was pretty neat.
Yep, that makes sense. I think Nurse was also just talking about designers from places that are not North America or Europe. And I'm definitely happy to see them. I don't like I see a little bit of activity from South America. I haven't seen much out of Africa, or at least that I'm aware is from Africa.
I can't actually think of an African designer that I know. I know two people in Africa that I speak with on Twitter that are from Africa, and that's it at this point.
Yeah, I know like Brazil seems to have something of a scene.
Costa Rica as well, which isn't really South, but it is definitely not the usual North American English language first. And I liked seeing some more projects. What was there was a project recently that was in Spanish on Kickstarter, and it was a pretty cool looking game, but I was surprised that they did Spanish language first, which speaks to that they might have a market like of folks.
Yeah, like I feel like there's a sort of a critical mass thing to regions where like at first there just isn't enough interest in board. Like you're just trying to find people to play board games, period. And then after you have enough people playing board games, then usually someone gets interested in designing, and then if you can actually get together a playtest group, then you're sort of off to the races. And then it's a matter of like getting the game in front of people.
Yeah, and I think the hobbies, I mean, obviously it's growing, so it's going to grow in all ways, including more designers, more languages, more perspectives, that kind of stuff. I have really enjoyed learning a little bit more about the Chinese and Japanese markets of late. I'm really glad that those designs are starting to become available in the English language markets too. I think they've got a really neat perspective over there, and they don't really have they don't get like a term like Ameritrash or Euro or anything, but they all seem to have these neat little, efficiency mechanisms and stuff, and I think it's really neat, but they don't have anything that defines them other than Seiji Kanai himself. Like,
right, yeah.
The one man kind of defines all of Japan in design right now, which is unfortunate because I think there's a lot going on over there.
There's an enormous array of interesting things happening, and it feels very interesting and experimental, which I really appreciate. Like to some extent, I'm kind of burned out on, like worker placement things with one neat mechanism tacked onto the side. Which is I love me some worker placement stuff.
I think I'm lucky that I don't think I've played enough worker placement to get sick of it yet. I do think that it can be lazy design, and that's not something I say lightly because I know that designers work really hard and they just let their brains bubble around for a long time to try and make up these things. But worker placement with one clever twist seems to be kind of one of those package games, kind of like the Cards Against Humanity reskins. Like, it's worker placement, but, and then enter one thing.
This is true of like a lot of like relatively popular mechanisms. There's like, the great family of Yahtzee, like Yahtzee, but or Dominion, like Dominion, but deck builders, and so on and so forth. or like
Or it's like
Ascension Bus.
Magic, but or yeah. I mean, there are definitely lots of those types of things. I think worker placement though. I wish people would just goof around with it just a smidge more, because if it doesn't, if I can just say, oh, it's Kalis, but in like 5 minutes of learning your game, it's an issue. I think my favorite designs always have like multiple different mechanisms kind of mushed together,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't see those on Kickstarter because they're way more expensive than a pack of cards. And I wish it wasn't true, but I do see more publishers focusing on their smaller game lines and smaller footprint games and things that can be tested and put together much easier than a larger Euro. Those are way expensive.
Large heroes are like really expensive to develop and produce, and they sell fewer copies. And like from a business perspective, especially, I can totally understand why they're focusing on the smaller games.
Right. I get it. And I think there's a large element of companies that use Kickstarter even though they probably don't need to anymore, and they use it for this publicity thing. So they just pump out these campaigns that are pretty easy to put together and kind of 1, 2, 3 and prepackaged almost. Not that they need to, they just want to keep their name alive there in case they want to make a big minis game or something next year.
Yeah, it's also like, I guess there's various stages, I think, of being like scales, I guess, of being a publisher. Like there's actually big publishers like Pegasus who definitely don't need to. They have the cash flow to actually fund new titles. But there's also like this sort of intermediate stage where like you've done your first few games, but you also don't really have the cash flow necessarily to fund the next game that you want to try publishing, and you're not sure that there's demand for it. And most importantly, you're not sure how many copies to order, like whether to do a 1,000 copy print run or a 3,000 copy print run. And I've watched enough companies go under because they print it. They're like, oh, this is going to be a big hit, and they print 5,000 copies and then sell 1,000 or 1,500 of those, and that's the end.
Yeah, I know a lot of people with a lot of games in their garage at home, just waiting for that, day that they're going to get really popular. I think, sorry, I saw Erwin's comment about Queen. I think kickstarting companies, they could do a better job of budgeting in the next print run. Like Millennium Blades is up for a reprint on Kickstarter right now, and I wish we as consumers of Kickstarter, which is not supposed to be a consumer thing, you're not really buying anything, you're just helping them build something, but in all realities you're purchasing a game from them.
But FTC agrees.
Right. But I wish that like we as consumers would allow them to budget the next print run into games, or like something like Level 99 where they pretty much know that they've got a hit on their hands no matter what they print. With one big exception of Pixel Tactics, the like deluxe version for some reason couldn't sell to save its life. But I think Level 99 at this point knows that almost everything they put out is going to do well to very well, and we should allow them some room in their budget for the next printing, in my opinion. But
yeah, I'm used to like I haven't done a lot of publishing type stuff. I've done a tiny bit, and it's pretty normal to price and size your first print run such that once you sell it through it, you can afford to print the next batch.
Right? Isn't that the goal? Like, isn't that the hope for most game companies?
One would think, but there's also some discussion of just like promotional stuff, and I think that like the Kickstarter segments and things like that have a lot to do with it. Like I don't know of another platform that has like dedicated segments in board game media to it. Yeah. To some extent, we've sort of done it to ourselves.
Right. And so Chris is asking about publishers bringing a promo to Kickstarter, starting it there, moving it to cons, eventually leading to be able to purchase it. I think you'll find, if I'm not mistaken, Nicholas, that you and I are not the typical, like, I really don't care if something's exclusive to Kickstarter or not. Like, if it's available to more people later, I don't really care at all. I know psychologically why they provide exclusives, but I've never seen the value in it.
I actually really hate. I dislike exclusives because of the like social dynamics of them, rather than anything that I actually like that they affect me in any way. Usually, there are some like exceptions, like I guess not exclusives, but things that feel like they should be part of the base game and then are sold as like if you backed on the Kickstarter, then you got this with the base game. If you didn't back on the Kickstarter, then it's like an extra $15 or whatever. I'm thinking of Tricarion as like a recent example of this, where there was stuff that just should have been in the base game and wasn't. Or
The other one, I think, Argent the Consortium should have the first expansion that they sold, which was like a ridiculous, like a $30 expansion, really should have been part of the base game. It had 2 more like races in the game. I don't remember what they're called. They're like classes or whatever.
Mhm.
But that was one where I was just like, oh man, this really should have been in the base of the game. Core Worlds getting split up, that wasn't a Kickstarter project, but that one was pretty obvious that they had tried to filter out content that you'd have to purchase later to make the game kind of full again. And then level 99, I'm glad I really don't care about promos, because the amount of stuff that they provide with their Kickstarters that don't make it to retail is huge. Tons of promos.
Interesting. Yeah, I think also part of it is that like I don't like playing with promos hardly ever. Like they tend to be less well tested than the other content. Like they tend to be less well tested than the base game or expansion, which makes sense because they're just a promo, and they're meant to be like a sweetener for if you buy from the publisher or you buy at a con from them and stuff like that, or you back the Kickstarter. And I think that's like perfectly reasonable if they toss in like a few extra cards for that.
I prefer what Magic does typically, and it's always like an upgraded version of a single card. Like it'll be a foil card, or it'll be like alternate art or something to something that's already present in the game. They don't typically put out anything that's going to mess with the game at all, and I would much prefer if board games got on that track. Like if I could just get like foiled out cards or something like that as promos most of the time, I'd be pretty happy. There's like promos like the Rococo fancy dresses promo, which I feel like is necessary to the game, which is frustrating. They did make it pretty well available after the fact, but for a couple of years it was just impossible to find.
I feel like I got that with my game, but I don't remember. I've also been confused about whether I bought it from Edgar Spiela, although I'm now pretty sure I didn't because they sold out before I decided to buy it, which is the mistake I try to avoid.
Well, the fancy dresses promo is it enhances the blue color in the game. Yes. Yeah. For me, that made the game a little bit more fun. I had a lot more fun once there was a little bit more blue in the environment. I mean, red is still super scarce, but that's fine. Right. Having 2 colors scarce was frustrating.
Yeah, there's definitely like, why is this? Okay, I don't care. Like, why did I pay for this?
Yeah, so Eric says the same thing, like foiled out or alternate art, like that's the way to be for me for promos. Like I don't really want your swingy, untested, random card or character or power or whatever. I would much rather have something that's part of the game, just a nicer version or something.
Yeah, the things that like the only recent example I can think of like alternate art type stuff is I think for Ave Roma they're doing something where for the Kickstarter print run they're going to include the like prototype style board on one side and their other like actually illustrated thing on the other side. Which
My favorite that did that, my favorite and least favorite was Coup. If you backed the Coup Kickstarter, you got art, unique art for all the characters. Like every card that you would put in the game was unique. Which playing the retail version later, where you had like the same art for all your assassins and stuff, I was like, oh man, that should have been in the retail. But I was really glad to have all that like beautiful new art for everything.
That sounds really expensive.
Yeah, I mean it's super like Indie Boards and Cards is very lucky that they did as well as they did in the market, because I feel like they made some decisions that could have tanked their own company. Like art and those types of decisions. But they left out that they're
companies.
Yeah.
Like there's some companies that I feel like are just like, let's just splash gasoline on ourselves and see what happens. I don't know.
It could go up in flames. Whee! Wait, no, Patrick doesn't like Coup, and that's upsetting to me. I love Coup.
I still haven't played Coup, but
Really?
no.
I don't like the argue-y type social deduction games. Like Resistance is very like point finger yell, point finger yell. But Coup has sneaky bits and like a lot of cool bluffing. I like it a lot. And the bluffing is not difficult to do. You kind of, there are some things that you can just bluff and that's okay, and you probably will never get called on it. It's really nice. I played Hoax the other night, which is the Fantasy Flight recent, and it's kind of like Coup, but way harder to lie. Like super, super hard.
Harris was asking about other platforms like Indiegogo, and I just don't look at Indiegogo because there's nothing there.
Every once in a while I see a link or something and I'll go check out an Indiegogo. But for me, every once in a while, the German, it starts with an S and it's a very long word. There's a German, that. Every once in a while I'll get in on one of those, because Quali was going through those for a while. And Quali Games interests me, but I've never actually backed anything of theirs except for Factory Funner, which went through Kickstarter.
Which is like the heaviest, most dense box I've received in a while.
Yeah, there is no wasted space in that box. No. Factory Funner is unique. They certainly, if that was a Fantasy Flight game, it would be twice the size.
Yep.
They're still talking about Coup.
We need to put more air in that box.
What's that? We
need to put more air in that box.
Well, if you don't put air in the box, no one will ever see it.
Right.
So for Indie Boards and Cards 2, that was an interesting Kickstarter and project all over the place, because they essentially took a known game and kind of made their own version of it and then sold it, and that could have gone poorly. I think everything they've done could have gone really poorly and ended up working out well. It's an interesting company overall.
Was like Coup available much before the Indie Boards and Cards version?
I believe there was one version available that they had made, and then
so the way Le Mans, I'm not sure how to pronounce their game seems to work, is that they do like a print run of like 500 copies, and it's usually pretty janky, and then they see like whether or not people like it, which is a model that I really enjoy. Although I understand it's frustrating if like you don't get one of the first, if you don't get part of that batch and then you hear that the game is good, and then, or at least you're interested in the game, and then you can't get a hold of it for a while. That's always annoying.
And I'm always in that camp, because I try really hard not to just purchase things like without knowing anything about them. And hard. those types of runs, like the 500 tester runs and stuff like that, those tend to just go to the people that are willing to just click the button and buy the thing no matter what it was. I try really hard not to do that. But I did purchase Solarius mission this week on Fun Again, so maybe I'm a little guilty of it. But
so I say I need to go buy North American Railways because trains.
Yes, you do.
Trains, and it sounds weird drafting stock holding thing, and Pierre Sylvester. So
it's definitely going to be worth the dollars. I focused on Solarius Mission first because that's a little more important to me to get, but I will definitely have North American Railways at some point.
Although
It
I've been
looks
a little torn because like I know Spielworks is aiming for mid-August, and with the delay for Fun Again, I'm worried that's going to drop in October, and that's a horrible time for me. Just horrible.
just because of the con schedule.
Yeah, because I'll go. Well, the main thing is I'll go to Spiel and I'll pick up like 40 games at Spiel or something stupid like that. It's not 40, but it's a bunch of games. It's too many games, and then it's like I have a big stack of games to work through.
It might be close to 40. I mean, if you include all the little games and stuff like that.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. My suitcase is packed when I come back, and it just takes a long time to work through them. And so I try really hard to avoid having things arrive around that time because it's just such a big glut of games anyway. And I always hate. I really dislike having things for a while before I get around to playing them. Although that happens a lot.
I think that's everyone. None of us really want stuff to sit around and shrink or sit around unplayed. It does happen just because the nature of gaming is so cyclical. Like you have the kind of Ameritrash season, and you have the family game season, and you have the Euro season. And during October, November, I probably want to or learn upwards of 50 games or so, and I probably purchase about 20 of them. It just happens every year, no matter what. Daniel's asking, do you have a regular game night?
I don't, unfortunately. Well, my schedule is just generally crazy. Like there are groups of people who I play with semi-regularly, but I don't have anything super consistent right now. It's kind of frustrating.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't have any of my regular game nights anymore except for maybe my Thursdays, but they've been less consistent recently.
Yeah.
Apparently we're both having a bad year.
I wouldn't say my year is bad as much as like I feel like there was a period like what was bad for me was about 6 months ago where I was like I don't have people that I'm playing with regularly and I don't know who I'm going to play with regularly. Like at this point I have found people who I can play games with, and I feel like it's more like finding a rhythm than anything else, which isn't great per se, but it's like having hope, or like I don't know. I had hope before. It wasn't that bad.
Not that bad yet.
Like having something resembling a plan,
So what are you backing right now? Nutters asked.
So at the moment, I just have Yokohama. I don't think anything else.
My other one is Overseers and Yokohama.
Mm.
Overseers looked really interesting. It has some beautiful art to it. It's definitely in that I really, really need to read the rule book before it closes so I know whether or not to continue backing it. But I like to back as early as I can to share links and stuff.
I've read the rule book 2 years in a row for Spiel, and I keep waffling about it. So I've decided to not back the Kickstarter just because I am so unsure. It's like one of those things where I want people, like I'm uncertain, so I'd want other people to go out and tell me.
I think it was only 22 euros, so I backed it. No, like I'll get my money back out of it if I don't care for it. I'll at least get like $20 for it or something to trade it over here.
Yeah, and I know that part of it is also that it's like a game that doesn't fit the group that I've played with the most over the years. So it's like a game that I'm uncertain about. I'm not sure that I have an audience for, which is always frustrating because then I tend to it's the sort of game that I get and it just sits because I can't find anyone to actually try it with me.
I have those games. We all have those games.
Yeah.
I know Fugitive is on Kickstarter right now, which is Tim Fowers. My work is backing it because he consistently makes games that sell really well at retail, but I haven't really enjoyed either of his other games yet. Paperback was close but no cigar for me, and Burgle Bros was just too co-op-y.
Oh yeah, I'm happy people enjoy them though.
They're beautiful. They're well designed. They don't waste a lot of shelf space. I really, really, really like the small box design he makes. I think he is making consistently interesting games, which is great.
Yeah.
And he believes in indie game producers, and he like goes like during PAX, he was in the exhibition hall in like the indie mega booth, which was pretty nutty to me. I thought that was crazy that people were in there playing card games. So I think he's doing some interesting stuff. It's not. I maybe he's just not designing for me.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Dang it.
What the thing? I'm having a weird thing right now where I feel like there was some Kickstarter that I wanted to mention that was cool, but I can't remember.
Yeah, I'm having the same problem. I was hoping that people were going to be naming what they were backing, but Erwin is talking about Anachrony and Santorini and some of the games that he's waiting on to arrive. And unfortunately, I have probably 30 titles that are backed and just kind of somewhere in the queue of arrival. I'm interested to try Salem because it was one of the first games I ever backed, and it's finally coming out now. I mean, this was years and years ago.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be my type of game now that I know a little bit more about my gaming habits, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess we haven't talked about like release stuff much because there's definitely a thing with like you are guaranteed to get your game before other people or deadlines and stuff like that. But I tend to take a pretty laid back approach to Kickstarter of like I will get my game sometime. And the only thing that really
just treat it like Christmas, like they just arrive sometimes, and I'm like, "Woo, look, a game!"
Yeah. The only thing that like bugs me in terms of delivery stuff is when there's a period of several months between some people getting their games and other people getting their games. Like if it's 3+ months, then I start to get grumpy.
I think mine was prime time was like a couple months behind most people. And it was frustrating because I knew of other people in the States that had their copies, and I was just like, okay, they must just be like shipping them themselves, like a few copies at a time, whenever they had time. But it was more frustrating than anything because people were not so hot on the game. And there's nothing worse than like expecting a game and wanting to play it, but not really wanting to play it, if that makes sense.
Yep. That always sucks. Like I've been a little grumpy with Martin Wallace, I guess, at his company because they would do SN releases and then I'd get my game like 3 months later. I gave him this was like his weird subscription thing, which is really risky. And I've since figured out that Martin Wallace is so hit and miss for me that I should not do such things. But yeah, it was like I gave you money for this game like literally a year and a half ago. You released it at the fair. Okay, sure, I understand like chips and stuff, and then I get my game like 3 months later, and that's less than stellar.
I personally don't mind if a publisher has 200 copies to sell at Gen Con or Origins or whatever, and then when they get home from that fair, that's when they start their Kickstarter fulfillment. It doesn't bug me that much, but I see how much it bugs other people, and I can't believe that publishers do it without other circumstances having that go. I think it's a lot more bother than it's worth to sell those 200 copies if you're going to have 6 months of angry emails, and people are really, really mean online. They get very angry about their games. So I think Crash games, I've seen the worst of it. I think it was maybe Payday or the one right before Payday. And Patrick literally, I think, had the games but didn't bring them to cons because he didn't want to upset people. And I thought, gosh, that's like money out of his pocket, just because people are so upset about those types of things.
Right. Yeah, I'm definitely like in general, I'm very much in favor of publishers just getting their games out there. Like if you air freight copies and you're expecting them to ship, and then there's like some delay of a couple of weeks, and I really don't care.
Right.
It's only in the multiple months range that I start to care, and even then, like half the year I don't, because I have a big pile of games to go through anyway.
Here's the one that makes me salty. So in retail, when I get a pre-order ask for a game while it's live on Kickstarter, nothing frustrates me faster, because that means that both the distributor and the publisher know that the game is going to exist no matter what. Like, it's getting funded, it's getting printed, they're taking retail pre-orders, and at that point you should have just paid for printing yourself, because you are all the way down the supply chain. That one, like, there are definitely some folks that are way guilty of that, and I won't say it online, but I get really, really salty about that. I'm like, ugh, why are you using Kickstarter? This is not the thing. You don't actually need that money. You don't need this platform, but it's how it was built and it's how it's maintained. So I guess I have to just deal with it.
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing publishers do more of their own pre-order things. Like, I know Stonemaier has tried a thing with an expansion. The 51st State one was, I thought, generally okay. I feel weird about the alterations to the content and the box being identical, although that just generally drives me up the wall.
See, I didn't. I will be honest. I ordered 51st State Master Set without really reading the page super well, so that was all a surprise to me, that there was contents changed between when people pre-ordered and when they got it at retail. I didn't realize it till I read it online, because I just saw 51st State and I clicked it. Like, give me mine.
I got to read some things.
Yeah, I have things to do. But I think Daniel mentions in the chat, Stronghold is doing some interesting stuff for pre-order rather than Kickstarter. They did kickstart, I believe it was like some minis version of another game that they kickstarted, but before that, Stephen had always kind of said, no, we'll never kickstart anything. That's not our business model. But I think they've done a really good job of staying away from that kind of stereotypical business model, and instead Stephen works a lot of his own time going on podcasts and doing kind of like from the ground up promotion, which I think is pretty effective for him. And his pre-order deals are really good.
The and minis are like, well, there's like the stereotypical, underdeveloped game with some minis that makes $1 million on Kickstarter. But outside of that, I think that things where they want to do minis, that makes a lot of sense, because mini molds they're just such an enormous upfront cost to developing them. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I think if your game is going to be enhanced by Kickstarter, if the amount of money that you're going to make, like $1 million, enhances the game, right? You get a lot more stuff, you get a lot more content built, and a lot more molds or characters or whatever. I think that there is something to be said about that allows you to make the best version of the game possible. But my favorite thing to see on Kickstarter is upgrades to the retail version. The second they are upgrading the retail version with more monies on Kickstarter, I am really, really happy, because I think it's more fun when more people get the cool version than fewer people.
Yep. I'm always happy to see, like, we are going to use really thin chipboard, and we'll use slightly thicker chipboard. Those sorts of upgrades always make me happy. Or we were going to just do cardboard chits, but now we have money and we can actually put in cubes. That also works.
Eric asks about stretch goals. So stretch goals fall into the same realm for me as promos or expansions. A lot of time I see people putting stretch goals on that are not realistic, that are not budgeted out, that haven't taken into account that they might change the box shape or size or insert or cost. I think people do stretch goals really poorly sometimes. But you see established companies doing it really well, where they say, okay, we wanted this type of card stock, but we're willing to bump it up to this one if we get a certain amount of money. I think it's cheesy, but I like it anyway, where they have Facebook or Twitter goals,
Mhm.
a certain number of followers or a certain number of tweets with a hashtag will give you upgrades in game, because that tells me that first off the primary goal budgeted that in and that they don't want to do it, but it's a good way for them to remind themselves that they're always live, they're on the Kickstarter, they need to be marketing themselves, and it gives them some more incentive, where I see companies so desperately, like the last 2 days of their campaign, trying to reach out to bloggers and stuff like that. The second I get like our game's already on Kickstarter, would you share it? No, I don't want to do that at all. So I like stretch goals, but I think that they go wrong more than they go right. What do you think about stretch goals?
Yeah, I like upgrades to like small upgrades to components. I like, maybe that will do more art or something. I don't really care about extra content. That's usually like the most common stretch goals I see are like extra promo content, or this is some totally unnecessary component upgrade that we're only going to do for Kickstarter and is going to drastically inflate our fulfillment costs. Um, that's the sort of stuff that really bugs me. In general, I just sort of ignore stretch goals. There have been occasional stretch goals which I see as negative to me. Like there was one Kickstarter where they just gave you like heaps of games that weren't selling, and I was like, "What are you? What are you
There's
doing?"
nothing worse than that. Oh my God, when a company has like a card game or something that didn't do well, and they just start like putting them into their stretch goals as if it was an enhancement, and you're like, no, you're just trying to like get rid of inventory at this point. That frustrates me, because that takes away from those other stretch goals or promo or alt art or something that could be amazing. I personally like add-ons a little bit better than stretch goals, because I personally don't usually want a lot of those, and for the people that do, they can kind of buy up however nice they want their copy to be, and I can just get like the regular one. Yeah, I was actually just gonna say that, Eric. So nothing is more frustrating than a stretch goal for a fancy first player marker, because it's a first player marker. It's really stupid to make it super over the top fancy unless it is an integral part of the game. If it is just gonna start with one player and maybe rotate or just stay there for the rest of the game, I don't care. It could be anything, really. I usually use challenge coins anyway.
Yeah, I think the main thing that so I've seen some add-ons, like if they're just like promo content type stuff, then I tend to ignore them. But I've also seen some add-ons that are, I don't know, like they're nicer bits or something, and sometimes I'll get those, and that's usually fine. I do get annoyed sometimes when like they don't fit in the box, which tends to happen with smaller like card type games. And I've had like a few games, like my standard thing is that like if it's a card game and it's 50 cards or whatever, then that plus any bits that I have need to fit in a deck box. And if they don't fit in a deck box, then I'm just not going to do anything with it. Or at the very least, it needs to go back into the original box, which is even rare.
I get, especially for retail, there's nothing worse than having a game with something shrink wrapped outside of it because it doesn't fit in the box properly.
Right.
You are bad at planning, and you should feel bad. Like, this is
How do I
horrible.
shelve this?
Right. And sometimes it makes them lopsided, so they'll fall over on the shelf, or they'll cover up parts of the game on the back. It's never good. It's never a good thing to have a shrink wrapped bit on the outside of your game.
Yeah,
I remember
like you can get away with like a couple cards maybe slapped on the side, but I think that's about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Machikoro, the Harbor, the first expansion, has a card in the IDW version that is not right, and so every time I order it, every single time I have to get like a pack of replacement cards that we have to remember to give to people. It's so stupid, and I know they've been through a print run since they first printed that, so it's frustrating that it's still there.
Oh god.
Yeah, they just didn't like update their files or something.
Persistent typos are like the worst, the worst. Related issues, people who do reprints and don't update their rulebook based on like rules questions that they were asked a dozen times.
Well, but that is a whole nother story, because people taking feedback or using feedback in a positive way is rare. It's a rare treasure. The other night I was testing a game, and I gave a couple pieces of feedback, and I got the response I absolutely hate, which is, yes, these are the reasons why we did it the way you don't like. Like, I don't care why you did it the way I don't like. I just want to tell you that I didn't like something.
Right. There's like there's there are different modes of discussion. Like sometimes you want to discuss like why something is the way it is, and sometimes you want to discuss how we can make it better, and sometimes it's just I want to tell you that I think this sucks, and that's there's not a lot to it.
So overwhelmingly, though, the number of games I get off Kickstarter when Kickstarter was new, I tended to back things that looked like they were from established companies and looked semi-interesting. I have since adjusted that to also want to fit my tastes in games, but I definitely received maybe 20 to 30 games that I wouldn't typically like, that I just thought were cool campaigns. And the number of those that have broken elements or broken roles or lack of playtesting was overwhelming to me. Do you have that trouble anymore, or have you learned to get around projects that you think are not? I mean, I know you're a rulebook reader, but have you been able to kind of suss that out before a game hits your doorstep?
There are some kinds of things that I can spot that will be problematic from the rules. But there's also a lot of things that I just can't see from a rule book, or that emerge from interactions that I don't think through when I read the rule book. Yeah, like the things that are really hard to find beforehand are things like there's a weird combo in the cards, or I guess I don't so much mind when it's like a bunch of cards. It's hard to get a bunch of cards together. Like those sorts of almost abstract problems don't really bug me as much as like it's just this card, and if you get this other card, then you win. Those sorts of imbalances, or even just like this card is worth way more than this other card, and there's no pricing or drafting or anything to make that interesting. I have no idea about that sort of stuff beyond just like knowing designers and the publisher and people who are involved in actually developing the game.
Well, and I think we all have designers where we allow them to do some things less well than others. Like if I'm getting a Stefan Feld game, I know that the mechanisms are going to be interesting and well integrated, but there could very well be a best strategy. Like that just will happen in a lot of his games. It takes a while to suss out sometimes. Sometimes not so much like Amerigo, but I think that is always like, if I trust a designer, that's way different than trusting the company on Kickstarter.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down, like different companies have different amounts of involvement in actually developing the game itself. Like some companies are just like, they take the game from the designer, they maybe write the rule book, they get art and stuff, and they do the actual publishing and distribute, or getting it to distributors, part of the job. But
sure,
they don't,
like,
yeah.
But like Spielberg, a lot of those game companies are like way more involved in a game than something like a Z-Man game. Like Z-Man typically just purchases the rights to games that are already published and then puts them out.
Yep.
Whereas like Spielworks, Uli's probably had his hands all over the thing.
Right. Or like Argentum Verlog is pretty small, and I've come to recognize now, like it's interesting. I've played and read enough. I've played enough games and read enough rule books now that I can tell which publishers the rule book is from the designer, because the designer like has a writing style, and I know what that is. Like I can tell you a Martin Wallace rule book from a mile away.
Or Uwe Rosenberg, his rule books are very him.
Right.
I kind of like that though. I like when you can start seeing people's personalities come through in rule books, and that's true of like someone like Paul Grogan, whose hands have been in a lot of rule books, and you can kind of tell when he's
Yeah,
been involved.
I like seeing people's personality in rule books. I get the thing that worries me a lot is when the rule book isn't uh checked, I guess. And it's just really like there's a lot of bad rule books out there, and taking the rule book straight from the designer and immediately putting it into print is just one of many causes of bad rule books.
I think more rule books. I think people need to give a little credit to rule books more than they do. People always say things are. I have never heard someone actually compliment a rule book, which I think some rule books deserve some compliments because they're good, but there are. Everyone's really quick to say, "Oh, the rule book is horrible," but then what is your favorite rule book? Like, do you have one?
like there's a very short list of rule books from last year that I thought were good. I think Paul Grogan was involved in at least two of them. Like the Gallerist is really solid.
For
And
anyone watching, Paul Grogan is gaming rules on all the things. Go follow him. He's fabulous. And tired. He's tired.
Does so much work, and it's so wonderful. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. I was like, oh yeah, the Gallerist is great.
Yeah, but like I'm trying to remember the names of the game. I think I'm just having trouble remembering what came out when and stuff. But there were like approximately 3 rule books last year that I actually liked. And then there were like a lot of okay rule books, and then there was just some like I need to rewrite this, or I spent a week going through the rule book for some games. Which,
oh my god, Lignum! Lignum is one of the worst rule books I've read in a while.
Yes, I really dislike that one. Like ships, I spent a week like emailing Martin Wallace and going through dozens of forum threads and. Yeah.
Can you just rewrite that one for me so I could print it out? Ships is for a very simple game. Every turn you're going to put a ship down, pretty much. And then you get like 6 pages of rules after that to tell you what happens when you put a ship down.
Yeah, I ran out, like, if I thought that rulebook rewrite was like the main thing for ships, then I would probably consider doing it. But I also think there's like some graphic design stuff that would vastly improve teaching the game around like moving cubes and stuff.
It is a Martin Wallace game. That's kind of
right
territory there. I've never met a Martin Wallace rulebook that I liked.
Yes, yeah, exactly. This does bring me to like things that are not rulebooks that you can do to make your game way easier to teach. And I think the 2 big things are terminology. Like I'm really put off by like thematic terminology that doesn't really tie well to the mechanisms. Like, I don't know. Like if you have a weird term for shuffling a deck, then I'm going to be grumpy.
So that is built for thematic players, though, right? Like when you learn Netrunner, both sides have different terminology for their hand and deck and discard pile. That's pretty theming, like hardcore theme.
Right, and there's like genres where I understand that, like particularly for games like collectible, not collectible, but LCGs and stuff like that. Like that makes sense to me because it's like a game that you expect people to engage with a lot. If it's like a Euro game and then that doesn't have that level of engagement and isn't that thematic in the first place, like using a few words differently is not going to make your game thematic,
But I think that's a huge problem with Kickstarter right now is that so many people are moving away from keywords with explanation text like magic, and they're going to full-on sentences like, when you take 2 damage, deal blah, blah, blah to whatever. And I really, really, really hope that trend reverses. I've been seeing a lot of card games with long-form sentences, and it's super English language dependent and reading dependent and just overall harder to get into a game or get good at a game because you're so worried about making sure you stay up on the terminology of everything else. I really hope keywords make a comeback, but I know that people don't like reference cards anymore. I don't know what's going on in games right now.
I don't know. One trend I do like is the icons with a couple sentences of explanation. I mean, depending on the complexity of what it is. Like sometimes it's just 3 words or whatever. Draw 3 cards. I like that a lot because it gets rid of the reference card element or reference sheet, while also giving you like icons that are quick and easy to scan. And once you get used to the game, they're fine. But if you're less familiar with the game, it saves you a lot of, but what does this mean again? Types of questions.
But I feel like, so I mostly teach games. I don't replay a ton of things because of the way my life is. I think that iconography can both distract and confuse people if it's not done with sentences or keywords. Like you mentioned having both there. I think it's fine to have iconography as long as there's other stuff around it. We were playing Ginkopolis just yesterday, and people were asking me or trying to remember how to do something using the iconography on the shields, like the player screens. And it's so confusing. I can't, like, I know the game super, super well, and I cannot tell you what that icon is supposed to be telling you. Like, I have no idea.
Yeah. Icons are definitely easy to screw up. I think keywords are. I think the main thing with keywords is that so many games are inconsistent with their terminology in the first place that keywords are kind of hopeless.
Especially translated games, you see terms being used interchangeably, like rounds or phase.
Yeah.
You will find both instances in the same book about the same exact thing, but they didn't notice or define them well. Can be really confusing.
Yeah, it's like it's one of the first things I do when I edit a rule book, and it's one of the. It's not even that time consuming relative to other stuff that I do with rule books, but like just the first pass on making sure, like figuring out what different words are, like ship and boat are really minor. I'm trying to think of like a more concrete example. I think one was like in Food Chain Magnate, the first edition of the rules had like sometimes things were marketing tokens or advertising tokens or duration tokens, and they were actually all the same physical piece. And sometimes they were even the same thing in the same place.
Oh, no. The first 51st State, when they were talking about contact tokens, they used a lot of different words to describe that one thing. So someone in the chat actually mentioned this, like Portal's rulebooks are a little bit trouble. Like they're a little bit of trouble. You can't usually enjoy and play a game straight out of a Portal rulebook, but they have been, hiring Rodney Smith of Watch It Played to they did Stronghold and 51st State Master Set because they think they realize that the barrier to entry for their games is their rulebook, not their game. So I thought that was a really interesting move that they made this year toward like a better understanding of their games in an easier to manipulate way.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, I think the only rulebook that I've read from them that was like the closest one to okay was Imperial Settlers, I thought. And then
I learned that out of the book at Gen Con. I thought it was good.
Yeah, it was fine. And then I don't know what happened with some of the other things. Yeah.
Robinson Crusoe was rough. Oof.
Oh gosh.
I don't even like co-ops, so I'm like forcing myself into this game a little bit because I know like I really kind of want to be able to talk about it at least amongst people. So we spent, oh god, that first game was like 4 hours of Robinson Crusoe. And we died a horrible death.
Well, dying a horrible death is expected in Robinson Crusoe. But I played a game for I don't know a few hours, and then realized that A, we were playing things wrong, and B, we were playing things easier, and C, that this really wasn't our game. Period.
But I think as people like Paul Inkow, Paul Grogan, yourself, other people that either sell or donate their time to rulebooks and those types of things that will help the Kickstarter community overall. I feel like a lot of companies are starting to understand that their rulebooks and things are needing more work than they had been previously. I've been watching Daniel Solis has been streaming as he's been editing a rule book, and I know he's not writing the rule book or anything, he's doing the graphic design, but it was interesting to like watch it as it's being edited together, because like those decisions of where things are and where information appears and how it appears is really important. So it's been interesting to kind of see that behind the scenes. I don't know if you guys watch graphic design on Twitch, but it's been fun for me because I just kind of put it in the background at work.
Yeah, I haven't actually gotten to watch Daniel's thing. Definitely one of the things I struggle with a lot when I'm editing is trying to, like, publishers tend to give me, I haven't had that many rulebooks yet, but I tend to get them relatively late in the process where like they've already done layout and stuff. And at that point, it's kind of usually too late to ask them to like, this really needs to be explained like 5 pages earlier than you do or whatever it is. So I'm always happiest when I get like rough text first and I can make those sorts of suggestions, because they are definitely important, and there's only so much rewording and rearrangement of sentences can accomplish for you.
I think, and definitely, the earlier you can get a hold of those types of things, the better, because there was a trend going for maybe the last 2 years or so, where they would tell you a lot of game rules inside the component lists, and I really wanted that to just die. I want to set up the game and get the game board going and like kind of know where the pieces go, but I don't want any rules in that process. I want to get the board set up as it is and then learn how to play the game. Ugh, nothing more frustrating to me than having to read component lists carefully and for rules.
Right. I sort of understood, like, the part of it that made sense to me was trying to define like the like sort of glossary role alongside the components, but it was always pretty awkward. And usually if you need a glossary, then you're in trouble.
They're talking about the Preta whatever in the chat right now, and the place I learned how to play that game for the second time, because I had played once and 4 years later I played at New Year's Eve at a friend's house. We actually played it out of the rulebook and it went okay, surprisingly, for us for a Portal game. We didn't have any real big problems. I don't know.
Publishers that I feel like they trip and they actually end up with a good rulebook every now and then. Well, I don't know if like there's like one heroic playtester who like helps them edit that particular one or whatever, but I salute whatever the mysterious reason is.
Right. It was one of the few Portal games that I knew how the game ended and how to get points. Like, oh, I know both of those things before the game ends. That's great. Like Deluvia Project, if I had read the rules a little bit more carefully, because we read that at a con, which is always trouble, but we didn't realize quite how significant the gardens were going to be before we ended the first game, and we got to the scoring, and it was just like, holy moly, that's all the points.
Yes, there's like the rest of the game, and then there's how to position your garden.
But I've seen a couple of rule books lately, and I'm failing to remember which ones, but there was one that recently had a chart of literally like money, how do I get it, points, how do I get it, and like where do they come from.
Yeah.
I can't remember what game it was. It was really, really recent. I want to say
Vital's been doing it.
Yeah.
A lot.
Oh, yeah.
Which is fantastic, especially for his games.
Vital, no matter who publishes his games, has great rule books, no matter what anyone says. I love his rule books.
Yeah, I think like the only time I've been bothered by them was like the setup for Kanban, but that's like reaching for me.
But the rest of the Kanban rulebook was very good.
Yeah, it was totally fine.
Although I still don't understand why Nice Sandra exists, but that's just me.
I wish someone had told me to avoid Nice Sandra instead of trying to play it a few times. But that's
I only played it once, and it was recently after playing Mean Sandra like 12, 13 times. It's really awful. Yeah, no.
Friends don't let friends play Nice Sandra.
But yeah, I think really is coming into his own for rulebooks, and the Gallerist was so easy to learn for such a heavy game, and the player aid cards are fabulous, and anyone that I've taught knows how much I love them, because I just like, oh my god, everything you're going to ask me is right here on this player aid. It's great.
Yes, good player aids are amazing. That should not be a stretch goal.
Oh my god, player reference cards is a stretch goal. I will murder your face. I'd probably get in your comments and just say no. For Kickstarter, I have had a little bit of experience trying to give people suggestions for rules and things, because generally speaking, nothing's at the printer by the time they start their Kickstarter, but very few creators want to edit anything at that point. They are ready to make their game, they're ready to put their baby out in the world, and they don't really want to hear about anything else, and I get frustrated by that. Yeah. So I stopped making suggestions a while ago.
Yeah, it's been tough, but I've slowly learned to at least sometimes ask beforehand if they're interested in feedback on their rulebook before I spend time writing. And there are some things that are just like questions, which is the sort of thing that I will do without hesitation. And then there's like, I think you would be better off if this was like this, and that's the thing that I try to avoid putting any energy into before they tell me that they want it. Right. And then sometimes I feel like I'm chasing the publisher, and they're like, yeah, that would be nice. And I'm like, but give me the rules.
But please more rules.
And please not like a week before you want to go to the printer, because I have a life.
Netters, you absolutely need to play Kanban. Netters recently played her first game of Terra Mystica. I am dying to hear a vlog or something to know how that went. I think Terra Mystica should be on everyone's must-play list at least once, even if they don't like long games. It's not that long. It's not that bad. Though I did see on Twitter yesterday, someone had made a little more randomness in the game. Instead of picking their races, they just drew them out of a hat almost. And I thought that was like a really odd thing to add to Terra Mystica, because you're supposed to be able to see the round bonuses and see everything before you choose your race, or you play the auction rules in the expansion. But it was just that they didn't really want to do any of that, and they just pulled them out. And I was like, oh god, I would hate to get the wrong race at the wrong time with the wrong player count. I would be absolutely frustrated.
Yeah, I do appreciate when games include like recommended sets for first time play. Like these things work okay together. Just lay them out this way. And they're like slightly easier to understand. I'm not a big fan of like, this is like the easier version of the game. But if there's like a recommended
version, but if it's a heavy game like Terra Mystica has an absolutely perfect starting scenario. Like they give you easy to drive races that have like very clear paths to victory. Like you play Nomads and you're just like stomping down sandstorms and stuff like that, and you're fine. I love their starting scenario in that book, but I don't always like starting scenarios. Mombasa, I would never have played that game again if I didn't know that that was a starting scenario.
Yes, it's easy to go wrong, but there's lots of nice examples, fortunately. Like, I feel like that's something that usually works out okay.
Especially for heavier. The heavier the game, the more I'm willing to try a demo or suggested startup or whatever. The lighter the game, like Quadropolis, I didn't play the classic version of it until like my third or fourth game of it, because I'm just going to skip right over that for lighter stuff.
I've had some hilarious incidents where I've done that with games that, you should really play the easier version. Like Planet Steam has a bunch of rules that are just, they're basically rules that lock you into decisions. And I think that on the whole, they're good once you know what you're doing. But when it's your first time and you're like, oh, I put the wrong thing in the wrong place, and now I'm sad.
Planet Steam, I only got to play that game twice. And I played Mule twice now. And I think Planet Steam is a far better game. I don't really like the Mule adaptation. But I really would like to play it more. It's just so weird. So it's based on the Mule video game, like kind of like the Mule board game was, but it's like this crazy economic market that always crashes or always is in boom. Like, it doesn't seem to have a middle ground.
No.
It was so weird. Man, that game's weird.
Things are doing, and a lot of it is like timing and knowing when to do what, I think. And auctioning. Auctions are so important. It's such a bizarre game. But I loves it. The mule game I looked at, I was like, this is not for me. This is like taking all the things I love and like, let's add cards with like random events and random.
It is much closer to the video game.
Yeah.
It is because the video game was all about the random events of like, now your crops don't work this round, or like now there's a meteor and you lose one. And I only played the video game after I learned that Planet Steam was based off of it. So I don't have any nostalgic value to it. I thought it was a very random video game. Netters is asking, so what do you think? She's not played Kanban or Terra Mystica. What should she play first?
Terra Mystica.
That's where I landed, like barely on Terra Mystica's side, but you need to play both. Just saying. My friend Ross, who also played Mombasa with me, also piped up and just said like the starting scenario is horrible. It's a horrible introduction to a better game than it's coming off as at that point.
Yeah.
Poor Mombasa. I got kind of tossed to the side for so many other games this year. I really didn't delve into it, or Signori. I owe those games a little bit more play.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, Signori, wait, no, I have played it again. Never mind. I was gonna say I need to play a second time. But I think Signori needs something like I know Paul Grogan suggests a variant for Signori where you shorten it by a round, and I can see that making the game significantly better. And I'm sort of interested in trying it with that.
Yeah, it's a mite long, just a smidge. And it came out at the same time as Grand Austria Hotel, which I liked a lot better. Because when you're talking dice drafting, I just preferred Grand Austria's version of it because I had seen it in La Granja, but I had not seen it manipulated so well. And Signori's dice drafting is just a little bit clunky, is the word I want to use. Just not as smooth.
I can see that. Yeah, I was actually thinking about Signori versus Mombasa because they both, like, Mombasa is a game that people tend to complain is around too short when they're getting started with it. And Signori seems to be around too long even when you're first starting with it. But I find those sorts of trade-offs very interesting.
So do I, because you never really know if that's your play group or even your decision processes or whatever. I think for me, Signori wasn't too long my first couple plays, but it's probably because we were still learning it. Because you don't really find that out until you've delved in a little bit deeper to a game.
Yeah, there's definitely, like, the thing that I'm thinking of is, like, there's the I've done everything. There's nothing that I wish I could have done and did not do. Yeah. When you get into the last round and you're like, I guess I'll do this thing because all the spaces are full, that's when you have a problem.
That's true. On that note, I realize the time. We've actually gone over 90 minutes, which I didn't mean to do. Sorry, everybody. I was really enjoying my conversation with you, Nicholas. I really appreciate you coming by.
Happy to be on.
We will be back next weekend with some more chats. If you would like to be on the Hangout, just send me a message. I'm considering anywhere from 1 to 2 guests per episode, so let me know. I am Maggibot. You can find me online at all the things, Maggibot. And we have a new website called Meeples Included. I would also appreciate if you check that out and give us some likes and love. Nicholas, where can people find you?
I'm Nicholas Coe on Twitter, and I am also Meeples Included. I think I'm Move Alerts on Instagram, but I'm Nicholas Coe most places, BGG and Twitter. You can find me there.
Yay! I really am loving what Nicholas has been doing for Meeples Included. They did a Imhotep kind of gameplay video recently, and that game is just about to hit the States. It's coming to the store any day now for me. And up next, I think, is Chicago Express with some strategy and stuff. So I'm really excited to see that.
Yep. I hope it helps.
I hope so too, because I need to delve into Chicago Express more than I have because I only played once. Not enough.
And now I'm interested in Mystic Vale, darn you.
Mystic Vale is really fun, and I feel bad because AEG wrote back to me and said, "Oh, we appreciate your honest feedback. It's okay if you rip us a new one every once in a while." I was like, "But I thought I was A-okay with the game. I was hoping I was selling it, but I don't know what I said, but it came off as kind of negative. But it was very good. I like it."
I don't know what they would. Maybe they watched a different video.
Either that or they just like took some criticism in there to be like my whole opinion of it. There's always going to be criticism in a game, right? Like nothing's perfect except for
I would
Terra
hope
Mystica.
so.
Yeah. Have a nice day, everybody, and we'll see you online soon. Bye.
Bye.
Mouse thing.